So welcome, really good to have you. So as part of our exhibit, which runs until December 2nd, we have a very special guest, Dr. Bill Kolomyjec. He is one of the very early pioneers of generative art. And so we're happy to have him. And he's gonna give us a little retrospective from the early days up until now. So welcome, Dr. Bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Stas. It's a pleasure being in Toronto. Yesterday I was in Tampa, so it's quite a difference. I'm here to both learn and to support this new thing called NFT. And it's interesting because when I got involved with the computers, things were quite different than they are today. So this talk will be not only about sort of the history of computer art, which is one of my favorite subjects, and the other favorite subject is it's mostly about me, okay? So let's see how this works. So this is just an overview. I began preparing for this talk by researching myself. I don't know how many of you can just type your name in Google and something pops up, right? Well, it turns out I typed my name in Google and a lot of stuff popped up. And in particular, I found an article that was an interview taken by a writer for Computer World magazine in 1978. And it really got me thinking about how long ago that was. All right? So the title of the article was called Shotgun Art, which approaches 1940 abstract expressionism. And I go, wow, that's a weird title. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's about computer art. So I started digging into it. And the interesting thing about Google is by just typing in a few words like your name, the IBM 1800 machine, and computer art, this article popped up. And actually, here it is. We're hooked into the... So what Google did is they started scanning all the magazines and books in the beginning. And they did it for a long time before people started saying, hey, what about these copyright issues and stuff? But they really did us a service and they preserved all this history. Computer World magazine was actually a trade journal magazine back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and they had quite an influence. So it was kind of a big deal. Now, I'm not gonna, so there's the title of the article. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about that to kind of set a historical preference for you all. But, you know, and then that was really interesting of how this really kind of parallels the growth of the whole computer art thing. Because I think there's many different similarities between then and now. People's acceptance of NFTs, nobody knows what the heck it's about, or you know, they hear about it, they hear all kinds of media about it, but nobody really knows about it. And back then, when I was doing computer art, it was like, what the heck is that? You can't use a computer to make art. So I had a lot larger challenge back then than things people do nowadays. So let me get out of this. And I believe I have to do this. Okay. So the Computer World article provides both provenance, you know, that I was there, I guess, and a cool way of helping me remember, because I'm old, I'm 74 years old now, of my roots. So these are some of the things that were in the article. I'd rather do computer art than anything else, so I teach. So that's the way the article started out. Now, you have to remember back in the 70s, who had the computers? I mean, there were no personal computers, right? Apple came out in 75, Macintosh 1986. So in order to do computer art, you had to be where the medium was, right? And in the 70s, who had the medium? Who had the computers? Government, big business and industry, and universities. So at that time, I was going to school at Michigan State University, all right? So I was in one of these locations. Nobody had a personal computer at all. So I started college in 1965, and I believed I wanted to be an engineer. And I was into graphics before college. I had won a drawing contest, a mechanical drawing contest in high school. So that's kind of put me in a direction of doing graphics. And when I started out, I thought I wanted to be an engineer. But first year of engineering was really boring. It was all guys in the classes. I was 17 when I went to college. And so I joined a fraternity so I could experience that whole thing in college, and ended up still a little bit in engineering, but starting to take classes in industrial design, which was a lot easier to graduate in when you're having a good time in college than engineering. So I don't know, that's just how it happened. But while I was working on my BFA in industrial design, I noticed that computer more and more was entering into the design process. People were talking about ergonomics, and they were starting to digitize humans in extreme reach situations. I remember some of the early drawings. And I said, wow, that kind of looks like art. It's interesting. So the only thing happening back then as I got my BFA is it was the 60s, 69, and there was a war on. So I had to stop my studies and either get drafted or join. So I ended up joining the Army and going to Europe instead of Vietnam. And as a result, when I got done with my military obligation, I kind of grew up. I wanted to do this even more, and I got the GI Bill. So that basically paid for my MFA and PhD, which was a good deal. So I went to Europe. I saw a lot of art. When you major in art, you get to take cool art history classes. So I actually visited the stuff I studied in school, and I was inspired to kind of keep doing art. And then because of a certain law, Soldier-Sailor Act, they had to give me my teaching assistantship back when I got out of the Army, and I started teaching again. So I exited the Army, went back to college on the GI Bill. I returned to my former teaching position as an instructor, and I started working on an MFA in graphic design. So, a lot of things happening in universities at the time. This whole thing about the computer was taking off, all right? And since we were an instructional service department teaching graphics to engineers, we also were tasked with the job of teaching beginning programming. So I was both doing graphics, and since I was an instructor, I caught on to the programming as well as anybody else at the time, because programming back then was like crawling through 50 yards of broken glass on your hands and knees. It was really, you had to be dedicated to be a programmer. So actually our department was where the College of Computer Science kind of grew out of. Some of the faculty moved into that. They hired a dean, they built a building, they put a big computer in it. That was computer science department. So from 1973 to 75, I was in the right place at the right time, okay? I had access to the medium, right, because I was in a university. I had support from great mentors. Like, mentors make a big difference in the world. One of the guys in engineering graphics took me under the wing. He taught me how to teach, taught me how to start translating graphics into numbers and writing equations to draw perspective and rotation and all these things, all these fundamental algorithms that didn't exist before, but we wanted to draw with the computer. How do we do it? And I had an opportunity to make computer art. I was out of the Army. I went into this MFA program. I had a crazy professor who supported me. He told me, go for it. So these three things together allowed me to boldly go where no man or woman had gone before. Nobody was doing computer art at the time. So whenever you catch on to something unique, you kind of feel special and you pursue it a little further. All right. So I ended up receiving an MFA in graphic design in 1975. And when you get an MFA, you have to have an MFA show. So I showed a series of computer drawings, and I'll show you a few of them. But I was the first one ever to have an exhibition of computer art, certainly at Michigan State University, and pretty much in the United States. So that's fortuitous, or makes me special, or whatever, but that's how it went. So after I got my MFA, that was in 1975, I loved being a college professor, and I loved making computer art, so I had to figure out a way to stay in a university to have access to the medium. So I said, right across the street from the College of Engineering was the College of Education. So I went over there and said, what do I have to do to get a PhD? And back then, it's a matter of you find the right person, you write your own curriculum. Most of my transcript classes were called special problems. So those were the classes that I enrolled in to make computer art. And I was the only one in the class. So it turned out to be pretty cool. So I ended up getting a PhD in education in 1980, and that's why I make everybody call me Dr. Bill. Back to the article. I was quoted as saying I considered myself as a pioneer of the medium. Well, there was nobody else doing it, all right? And traditional artists are scared to death of the technology involved, and most people are appalled by the idea of using computer art for artwork, the computer for artwork. I mean, I was in art school. One of my art professors found out I was making art on the computer, and he took me over to the window, made me face outside, and says, "Art comes from nature, not the computer." So, I mean, there was a lot of misunderstanding about computer art. You know, it was about there was no hand involved in the process, all right? And it was tough then, because they thought I was young and therefore naive. You know, and a lot of generative artists now are young and therefore naive, right? It was new. There are no standards to discuss my work. So what did they use? They applied the old standards to my work. They said, that's not art. You didn't make it, you know, you didn't look at nature to make anything. A lot of the older artists, it's happened in my career because I went on to be an associate professor of design elsewhere, the oligarchy were afraid of computers. When I taught at Northern Illinois, they wouldn't let me set up my computer labs in the art building. I had to go set them up in the music building because they just didn't want me taking loom space or something away from the rest of the faculty. So from the beginning, I had to both defend and champion my medium. And I kind of still doing it today, right? So the problem was they had taken the hand out of art. But I say, you know, the same argument occurred when photography came on the scene in the 1800s, late 1800s. You know, that's not art. You're using a camera to capture the moment. You know, what the hell is that going to do to my portrait business photography? So, you know, it's kind of a natural reaction to a new thing, especially by an established system, that being, you know, the art schools of the world. So that made it a little more challenging, and I'm just a stubborn Ukrainian, so I said, you know, hell with you, I'm going to do it anyway. You know, I know more than you. I use the computer as a traditional artist would use a brush or a tool. So there's this concept of a tool, right? So the computer is a tool. It doesn't do anything on its own. A brush doesn't do anything on its own. You know, you have to do something with it, right? So I made these other observations, and this is back in 1978. With the computer through programming, I have complete control, all right? I can turn trivial decisions over to the computer, use of randomness, okay? I'm challenging the notion of originality because every time I run my program, I get a different outcome, right? And I can determine how involved I want to get with the art. So not just generative art. I mean, I don't have to turn all the decisions over to the computer. I can write algorithms to make a lot of those decisions for me. And lately, I've been using Arduino and electronics, right? So I can put in sensors to sense movement. I want my art to be more interactive. But that's just a little thing I've been playing with lately. All right. And then there was this, what the whole title of the article was Shotgun Art. And I was trying to think where that came from. Well, back then, you had to punch holes in cards in Fortran, submit the deck, and it left your hand, and the computer did its work. And to get a plotter, at night they took the tape from the computer out and put it on the plotter, so you got your drawing back the next day. So what art form now do you do, and 24 hours later you get the output? I mean, nobody works like that anymore. People are so impatient now. If you can't do anything immediately, it's not worth doing. You know, we've become a very quick society or something, need instant gratification. So that shotgun thing where back then programs were executed back in batch mode, and it was sort of like putting ammunition in a shotgun and pulling the trigger was kind of a point I was trying to make. And the other thing was the abstract expressionists like Jackson Pollock, for example, they try to subconsciously remove themselves from making the painting. I mean, they deliberately get into a conscious state and start whipping paint around, and that's good. They want to, you know, it becomes art at another level. And pretty much, you know, the result is they often produce accidental occurrences and chance effects. So I use randomness a lot for this, right? I mean, I put parameters on these variables, and I just let the thing do its thing. And I'm often surprised by the output, just as these abstract expressioner was. So that was what I was trying to explain to this reporter, and she turned that into the title of this article, which to me was weird. All right, so let me we'll go to the Wayback Machine now to 78. I'll show you my methodology, my hardware, my software, my graphics primitives, because that's what you need to make computer art, okay? Okay, here's my hardware. This is an IBM 1800. It was sitting around the engineering building, 1965. It's an analog digital kind of a computer. It had an analog interface. So you could write code and it would control the switches in the back. This was how I input information into it, with a key punch. Right? You had to sit down, load cards in the upper left side. They feed into the middle. You type in a line of code, all right, and then it comes in the hopper on the right. And that was it. Who wants to make art with that? Well, that was what the choices were. The beauty was this was an obsolete machine at the time, and nobody wanted to use it, so I had the access. I was an instructor in the college of engineering. I just went in there and started using it. And they were happy, because that justified them having to sit around doing nothing. Okay, so that's my hardware. At least in the engineering building. This was the mainframe of the computer science building. This is a CDC 6500. And the computer science building had this on the second floor, and if you wanted to use the computer, you had to make a pilgrimage to the mainframe, all right? You had to submit your decks, and they would run it through this. In this picture, there's a card reader, some kind of processor, magnetic tapes, and in the background there you see CDC 6500, all right? And then once they ran the code, they'd write the output to tape, and then it would run this, the plotter. And here's a picture of the plotter. This is a CalComp 936 plotter, 36-inch bed. But the cool thing was I could put acid-free paper in it, and I could draw with ink. So I got at least reasonable quality artwork. And some of that you get actually on the wall right now. That was the output I was producing in this environment. Okay, so this is my medium. The software, and I just cut this out of Google, I was using Fortran 2 in the engineering building and Fortran 4 in the mainframe. Now, does anybody program in here? A few of you? All right, imagine writing code where you have no logical operators. All right, that's pretty funny, isn't it? So you have to evaluate an expression on whether it's minus, 0, or plus to branch. All right, so when Fortran 4 came along, we were allowed to use logical data types and Boolean expressions. Wow, what a big advancement. I mean, that's just made writing code a lot less arduous than it was. So Fortran 2, it's actually an acronym for formula translation. It was the language of the computers at the time that I was using, right? There were no alternatives. All right, these are a list of my graphic primitives. Ready? Turtle graphics, you know what that is. Yeah, I could move the pen to an XY coordinate with the pen up, or I could move the pen to an XY coordinate with the pen down. So everything drawn was a straight line segment, all right? Now, I did it very fast, but I had to turn every artistic visual idea into a series of dots and connect the dots, all right? That's the way it was. So that's it. There was nothing else. There's no color. It was a line, okay? So Turtle Graphics was popular. Seymour Papert, Sherry Turkle did it at MIT to teach kids programming. When the turtle's tail's down, it draws a line. But they were basically using polar coordinates, an angle and a direction. So that's easily converted to Cartesian coordinates using just simple formulas to convert it to X and Y. So I started learning about coordinate systems and two-dimensional space and how to move in it and how to, screen origins and placements of things and, okay, so that's my environment. Now I'm ready to make some art. So this is an example of one way of making art back then, and that was to come up with some kind of representational figure, in this case, a scorpion. I'm My birthday was last week, so I'm a Scorpio. I guess I picked that as one of my objects. Then I had to convert it into numbers. And I had to punch those numbers in cards. And I had to write code to manipulate those numbers, scale, translate, and rotate to do my artwork. All right? So this is, I mean, you had to really want it. And that's why there weren't too many people doing this back there. And you can start to see why. All right? Things were getting better, but they weren't good yet. So I just want to throw up a simple algorithm here. How do you draw a circle? All right? So this is the circle algorithm. This is key to a lot of my early artwork, and there's a lot of cool little one-line algorithms in this. But basically, you got your plotter space, you got an origin, you want to draw a circle, you got to bring it off the origin, or you draw around it. It's outside the window, basically. So there's the translation coordinates. Radius, that's the size, that's the scale factor, how big you want to draw a circle. The number of samples, to draw a circle, you had to draw a 36-sided polygon. It was perceived as a circle. That's gestalt. You look at a 36-sided polygon and your brain says circle. All right? The beauty of that is if you change that sampling rate to like 4, you get a square. If you change that sampling rate to 8, you get an octagon, right? So you start to see possibilities how to vary this. Then there's a simple for loop, and within there, you have to start by saying there's 360 degrees in the circle, and I want to go from 0 to 360 in increments, and that's what this for loop does. And then from that, you calculate the percent of how far you are along the circle. And that gives you the relative angle, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, okay, every 10 degrees. And then, in order to use the math that's built into the system, you got to convert degrees to radians, right? So these numbers are like old friends. How many degrees in a radian? What's a radian? It's instead of going from 0 to 360, radians go from 0 to pi over 2 to pi to 3 pi. So, I had to learn math to do this. Remember, I was an art major. I'm really good at math and trig now. I had a lot of engineering background, graphics background, but it's really math was the key back then, all right? And then you calculate the coordinates that you want to plot to using radius times the cosine of the angle in radians, and then you add in the translation factor. So I might be going a little deep here, but this is an algorithm. And all this art is algorithmic art, pretty much. So somebody's writing the code to produce it, right? I mean, I don't know how else you would do. Some of this is drawn, but most of it, you have to do some sort of program, especially to animate or move it. And some of the more non-representational stuff is pretty much done this way. Now, how do you deal with the pen? Well, you move to the first point on the circle, and then you just put the pen down the rest of the way around. All right, so that's the trip into science land here. All right, one more algorithm before we go on. My first exciting computer art piece was changing a banana into an ice cream cone. All right? It was just something I sat, and I remember at breakfast one morning with my wife living in married housing, and she liked banana ice cream, and I said, that's a cool idea. So I digitized, like I did the scorpion, a banana, and I digitized an ice cream cone, and then how do I change one into the other? Well, in math, there's this thing called linear interpolation, all right? And this is how it works. You digitize figure A, you translate it to this position. You digitize figure B, you translate it to this position. Then you use this little formula here. You join each point with a theoretical line, and you move some percentage of the way to that other point. So this is the midpoint, right? That's where the 0.5 in there. So by changing that percentage, right, you can draw the appropriate in-between. That's called linear transformation. It's a very simple algorithm. But that was so profound back then. I could change anything into anything. And in fact, I have changed water into wine this way, okay, so graphically. So here's the banana cone. This was one of the first pieces I did where I said, I've never seen this before. This is pretty cool. So it's pretty contrived. The banana kind of looks like you hold a deck of cards and you let it go, shoots out an ice cream cone. All right? So now after using all this medium and going through all this torture, I actually have a piece I can put on the wall and we can call art. All right? And that was exciting, right? It was worth the effort. Here's another simple piece I did in the beginning. This is using a distance and an angle that gives me a location off the middle of the screen. And I'm going to draw one of my crazy little creatures, a little frog, in that position. But I'm going to rotate the frog before I draw it. All right? So this is like, there's some dimensionality in this. You know, this is kind of cool. One of the things the computer does very well is whatever you tell it over and over again. So this is repetition. This is another major component of NFT art or computer art. Now I started saying, well, why I don't have to draw representational figures. Why don't I start writing algorithms? And I changed the circle algorithm to draw a square. And then I started arranging squares within squares. But by changing the central position of the inner square, I interpolated to the outer square. You see? When you start getting the little ideas, you start building on them. All right? So this is algorithmic art. There is no representational images in this. So the one on my left, you notice the actual center squares are distributed along a sine wave, right? And the other ones, they're just, the center location is random, but so are the number of increments for iterations for it to get out to the outside square. Pretty exciting, huh? I mean, this was 75, 76. This was another weird one. I mean, it was just weird. I started experimenting. Circle inside of a square. Each has the same number of points, and you just connect them in a certain way. And I'm creating like 2.5D, right? This looks like there's some volume here, right? And it may remind you of pine cones, people have told me, or, you know, candy in a wrapper kind of stuff, right? Organic illusion. This was another one. There were other people doing computer art at the time. A guy named George Neis, N-E-E-S. And he was in Germany, and he did a piece where he started out with squares in a line, and as it moved down the page, they started getting displaced more. So I used that idea to why not draw an array of squares and use the distance formula, right? Maybe this will ring some bells in your head to compute how far the square was from the outside, and the further it was, the more slop or randomness I add in, displacement and rotation. All right? So I've also done the inverse of that, I just don't have it here. This was a great piece. I mean, one of my favorites. Again, it's the same digitized image, not a frog now, but a goose, right? Maybe a Canadian goose, I don't know. But I'm just drawing the same image over and over again, but what's different is the orientation, the rotation of the goose is based on a function, right? A math function. So you get this surface movement, and I'm saying, holy moly, this looks like optical art to me, right? And that's what the optical artists were trying to do. You know, they make static images that make your eyes go all over the place, right? You still see that, right? So optical art was in about that era, believe it or not, a few years before. And, you know, it it influenced me. So about the time I graduated with my MFA, I was part of a cooperative gallery. And one of the things people did with computer or generated art back then is one of the girls in the cooperative gallery was a serigrapher, serigrapher, and she took my drawing and she colored in every goose and made one screen. She took a screen of the outline and painted the background. So I mean, I'd love to blow this up, but that added, this is color. So yeah, this is how you had to get color in your art. You had to go to another medium that had color. I had no color, right? So that's what we did back then, 76. So remember the scorpion? So I did the scorpion spin piece because my wife was a scorpion as well. And this was sort of about our relationship, the scorpion spin. I don't know, and that's sort of what inspired it. But But what I was trying to achieve here is tone, grayscale, right? From just lines. Remember, the only thing I could do was draw a line. So around the time I was already got my MFA and I was working on my PhD, I got a call from this crazy gallery in Chicago, the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art. They're still there. And they found out I was Ukrainian. They called me up and wanted me to do a show because they heard about computer art. I mean, there's a gallery wanting to show this stuff, right? Now, it's not the Whitney or anything else because those places are nuts, right? I'm not Banksy. I'm not popular. So these other galleries take chances on you. And they wanted to do a show, and I said, I don't want to just show my stuff. I'll curate a show for you, including mine. And that's what I did. So for 6 months, I wrote people who were making computer art at the time, and there weren't that many, and tried to talk them into sending art in to me for the show. So I ended up with, about 80 different pieces from 14 different people. So this was the poster, the mailing poster and the postcard. And this was, I put the brochure. I mean, I had a degree in graphic design, so I could do all this stuff, right? And then I put this in to basically show these were the people who were making computer art at the time. This is sort of my record of my contemporaries, colleagues, okay? There were people who were scientists, like Ken Knowlton from Bell Labs. There were people who were artists. There were basically an electronic oscilloscope philosopher artist, Herbert Franke, and Dwayne Palka. He was this weird programming guy who was doing state-of-the-art program. So I managed to talk these people to send in stuff in. And I found the slides for this, and I'm having them digitized right now, but that's my next project, all right? Because if this stuff, this art was dying. My legacy was dying until just recently when my son kind of woke me up and said, hey, Dad, we can make money off this stuff, turn them into NFTs. No, really. I mean, his motivation was, you got the content, I know how to do this, let's make some money, right? Isn't there a song about that? Let's make some money. So kind of awakened the bear in me. I felt like Rumpelstiltskin, coming out of a sleep. So when you get your PhD at a school, like a Big Ten school, they kick you out because they don't want you around. You paid your money and somebody else will pay. So I got a job in 1981 as an assistant professor of art at Ohio State University, teaching engineering graphics. And the same thing was happening at Ohio State that was happening at Michigan State. I was teaching not only engineering graphics, descriptive drawing, traditional rendering with pencil and paper, and we began teaching computer graphics. So that's why they hired me, because I knew that stuff. But I knew as an art guy, PhD guy, that I'd never get tenure there. So I was looking for something else to do, and I wanted to make computer art. So it turns out at Ohio State at the time was this guy named Chuck Surrey, and he and another guy started this computer graphic research group that was state-of-the-art back then, Cranston Surrey Research Group, look it up. And they were doing advanced 3D computer graphic animation. So I went over and I talked to Chuck, and he knew me and I knew him, and I said, just let me hang out. He said, sure, you want to be an adjunct professor? So I just hung out, and all I had to do was help his students, because he had this vision that he should be teaching artists as well as computer scientists. He brought the best programmers and best computer graphics people in, and then he brought in some pretty weird artists. And I was going to school there with people who went off to start their own computer graphics studios. Chris Wedge, he started Blue Sky Productions. He was in this class, all right? So I met a lot of interesting people. So Chuck, because this was a prominent kind of computer graphics center, he brought in all the old animators. So I met Chuck Jones, I met Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson, because now they're moving away from static imagery, black and white. They were doing state-of-the-art, meant moving color imagery. I mean, that is hot stuff, especially if you have the passion to make it. So I paired up with a woman who was a painter from Moore College. She was in school. And the idea was you draw a storyboard and then you animate it. So her storyboard looked like 5 fine art paintings. I mean, it was just so cool. And I was the programmer, and we made her story come to life using this new thing called three-dimensional computer graphic animation. And I'm going to show that to you. This was actually off an old videotape, so you're going to see a little video stuff in it. But here it is. This is state of the art.
Which year is it?
1985. This is her painting come to life.
And sound?
The sound was a music guy. We just found somebody to make the sound. There's the video noise.
This is the VHS.
Yeah. Okay, so there I am. There's Ann.
Really cool.
Well, we showed that at SIGGRAPH. SIGGRAPH is the ultimate computer graphics show, and it got on one of their historical tapes. And there was also a company, I forget the name of it, who gave us $1,000 for one frame of that movie, because it was all rendered high res. And you know, it's like, we made some money from something. So Ann got 500, I got 500, okay? So while I was at that show and the reception for that, I met this other guy, and he offered me a job to teach somewhere else. And that's when I went to Northern Illinois University. And there, in 4 years, I became an associate professor of design. So that's really fast to get tenure anywhere. And he said, I got your back. I want you to start a computer graphic program here. And I did. I created an electronic media major. Not easily, because remember, this is where the oligarchy was that I told you about. And I had to make some compromises, like move my labs into the music building, because he was the dean of music, art, and dance. And my advanced equipment he bought to lure me there was my own personal computer, an IBM PCAT with a Targa board in it, AT&T Targa board. And a Targa board is like a graphics board that outputs video in color, right? And that's state of the art in this era. So this was some of the stuff I started producing. I started writing my algorithmic art in a language called C, right? And I started applying some of my algorithms, and holy moly, I was able to be in the same room with my computer as long as I wanted to be and make my own computer art. So this was a big deal. So I did that for 4 years. And the pressure from the oligarchy was so much that they ended up ousting the dean, and my butt was, what do they call, ass was grass, so I had to do something different. So fortunately, I got a job at Pixar, okay? Only because people I knew at Ohio State were getting jobs, and they called me up to say, you know anybody? We're doing this thing? I said, yeah, me, get me out of here. So I ended up going to Pixar, and they hired me in marketing, and I was an evangelist. And my job was to sell this new piece of software called RenderMan, which is the software they use now to make the movies. It was 3D photorealistic rendering software. And I had to go out and explain this to people, and a lot like what I'm doing today. I mean, I would fly and do one-night stands wherever there was a tent and a screen, and show the images and get out of town. That was marketing back then. Well, after being there 22 months, Pixar at the time was making an image computer hardware, and Steve Jobs, who of course owned Pixar, said, we ain't doing that anymore. So he fired over half the company. And of course, I lost my job. But I had just moved my family and 2 kids there, and we had to do something. So 3 of us started our own company in empty offices in Pixar, and we ended up writing shaders to support RenderMan, and that's what we call the Valdis Group. So I'll show you some of our marketing collateral from that. And then this company started doing animation and growing again. They hired us back. So just by not leaving and sticking it out there, working on your own dime, basically, I ended up getting hired back. And they needed an international marketing manager. I didn't know crap about international marketing manager. And what my vice president told me was figure it out. So I ended up, we were making desktop shrink wrap products, and my job was to make connections with distributors and get them going all over the world. And in 4 years, I did that, right? But then Steve Jobs decided that nobody else can have this software, and he killed that business. But by then the movie had come out, Toy Story 1, and because I had a PhD in education, they kept me on to write CD-ROM games for kids with the programmers. I was the education specialist. So it just lucked out again. Well, that lasted until Disney took over. The rat moved in, and I got thrown out. But it was a good ride, right? So this was some of the collateral I was putting together just to sell this desktop rendering software. And the shaders are the things that put the textures on the objects. And what made photorealistic rendering software special was that you applied it to higher order geometry. Back then, most 3D modelers were producing geometry that was polygonal surfaces, but we were using, in other words, a sphere looked like a bunch of faces, all right? Like a mega decagon. But RenderMan said, well, why not make it a NURB or Bezier curved surface, NURB surface? And that's what we're using, and that's why we were able to achieve such a high quality of imaging. And that was the beginning of it. I mean, I was there at the beginning of it. And these are just a couple of little things I made with our little desktop applications. And this is some just of the Valis stuff. These are shaders. So when I was on my own with these three other people, we were making these, and this is what the company recognized was cool and they wanted, and they hired us back in. So this is just a lesson, just because you get fired, you don't have to leave. You can just prove to them you're worth it, I guess. They'll hire you back if you're lucky. All right, so we're gonna just do a little jump here. So after I lost my job at Pixar, and it was at a time where because I was an education specialist, I went over to UCal Berkeley, and I talked my way into being an adjunct professor in College of Education, and I started learning about computers and education and kids. That's what I was doing. But because I was there, I made some connections, and I ended up getting a job as a learning architect at Anderson Consulting. And then they found out I knew graphics, and I started doing graphics there, and they became a public company, and I became a senior graphic designer, and I did that for 11 years because I had to support my family, and they really paid well. So then in 2009, I was too old and making too much money, and there was a recession going on, so all right, they justified 100 different ways why they're kicking you out, and that was basically what happened. My mom had Alzheimer's, so I had to move to Florida to take care of her. So I ended up moving to Florida to take care of her, and before I got down there, I ended up landing a job as an adjunct faculty person at Art Institute of Tampa. The only problem was it was kind of a disreputable school, four-year for-profit college. But, I mean, they still needed people to teach, but there were like 5 presidents in that time I was there, and the government shut them down because they were giving people worthless degrees. I mean, whatever. So then I got a job at St. Pete College teaching as a professional training, teaching how to use Photoshop and Illustrator. And there was a program I took advantage of because I was quasi-unemployed, and I learned how to do Java web programming and JavaScript I already knew, Agile development. I got a certificate in programming Java. I was learning how to write apps, right? And because of that, I ended up getting an adjunct faculty position in the Department of Media Arts. And because the time was really a frustrating time with the mother dying of Alzheimer's and not really having a full-time job, I took up painting fish. So I'll show you a bit of that if you want. So that leads us to pretty much now. So I had all this stuff, and you get divorced twice, you lose things along the way, right? So I put together a website just to put my content online, and sort of like it was a living, resume. I wasn't looking for a job, but I thought I had done some important things with my life, so that's why I needed a website. So it's both an autobiography and a repository of my work. So I'll just show it to you quickly. drbillfish.com. All right. So I just called myself a digital media mentor. This is basically my little story. And down here, I just had to preserve my imagery. I mean, because you can look at some of it. It's getting yellow at the edges. I got it underneath my bed for 30 years, right? So I updated all my plotter art images, and here is sort of thumbnails of them. You'll recognize the banana cone over here. And these are all, my works. Here's changing water into wine right there. I told you I did that. Some of them are serious studies, like Aubrey Beardsley, the peacock there. There's some Escher-influenced pieces, the struggle between good and evil right there. There's the boxes. So this is just kind of a collection of the work I did like prior to my PhD, okay? So that's there, that's part of this website. And I'm not gonna spend too much time on all this. I told you I painted fish. Let's see if we can get that to come up.
So those ones you just showed, the black and white, you have the original print.
Yeah, I have most of the original prints, but some are in pretty bad shape, right? Well, because of our high-speed internet connection here. So I just needed a release. I was in Florida, I took care of my mom, going to the beach bars, and they had a lot of stupid fish on the wall there. So I said, I can paint better fish than that. So I started painting fish, but I started integrating some of my computer algorithm kind of techniques into it. And then I also met a woman, and she became my mermaid, so that's where these came from. So this is my girlfriend right there. Hey, you gotta have love. That's one of the motivations for living and, making art. So, I made this stuff, right? And there's a piece, a puffer fish over here that looks a lot like one of these generative art pieces in one of these panels. The oxy, puffer fish. So most of those barracuda 4 foot wide, 4 foot. So I had this artistic skill, and there's this thing when you're kind of in a slump in life, or if you're moving too far in one direction, you got to balance it out. So somebody wrote about high tech, high touch. The more involved you are in technology, the more you have to balance that with, feeling trees or something, painting fish, right? So I did that, and I was sleeping in the woods. I don't know. It happens. So let's go back. So finally, I wrote this Love Gen prototype. I'm not going to show that to you. We don't have time. But I started in the last 8 months creating these generative art pieces that were for sale for a while on Hen et Nung Hen. And let's see if I can get there. But this is my generative art now, okay? And I'm taking all my old algorithms plus writing new things that are pretty cool and crazy. I really shouldn't take the time to show you all these, but if you want to see them, go to drbillfish.com and play with them. Let's just pick, and some of these are pretty weird. Remember, optical art was always one of my, and because of see the little spinning red wheel there? The little train that could. This reminds me of the old days. This one's called Good Vibrations. And this is just a simple little algorithm that's designed to move you like my geese, but even better, I think. So this is the new me. And because of this, I'm here to find out about NFT, and through Stas really, you know, learn about how to make this more in demand by the public, so to speak, okay? So I have these skills, they haven't gone away. It's like riding a bike, right? I know how to code, I know about art, so why not do it? Anybody know what Arduino is? It's just a little $11 circuit board that you attach to your computer. The IDE is free. You start writing code and plugging stuff into it, and you get weird things. So this is, you know, trying to explore how people interact with the art. Generative art is like that. You push a button, you get a new picture. You push a button, you get, it's not animation, it's generative art. But, come on. Hi, I'm gonna turn the sound off. But my mermaid girlfriend made these videos, so I did them because I'm working with a friend of mine, Jim Pallas, who's older than I am, 80, and we've been friends like forever. And he's done some incredible large and small installations made out of electronics. There's like motion sensors, you know, the outdoor lights you walk by, they turn on. That's called a PIR motion sensor. And there's photoresistors that measure light. Okay, it outputs a voltage from 0 to 5 volts, and you can, that's analog. You can convert it to digital and do something with it. So, I mean, electronics are a lot like programming. I mean, there's logic. So there's it, and I was in the Signal Corps in the Army, so I remember a little bit. So this is this year. So I've been playing around with this. I'm getting more serious about NFTs because I want to, you know, I've got a lot to offer. I want to make them, but I don't want to get involved in the business of selling them. And that's why I'm talking to Stas. He's much better at this than I am. This is done out of a university in Germany, and George Nees, the guy I told you who did the boxes originally, he started this out where he didn't want all this early computer art to go away. So if you go in there and search for me, you start to see my old work. So there are a group of computer artists who set the stage for all this, okay? I'd like to think I'm one of them, but you know, maybe now you know that we existed, okay? So that's kind of the whole purpose of being here, okay? All right, so let's go back. We're contacting the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art. I called them up. My son's gonna go visit them next week, and I wanna do a 41-year retrospective show there, and they're interested because they supported me in the beginning. It turned out after I did the first show there, 6 months later, the Whitney Gallery had a first computer art show, all right? So it's being a pioneer are the people that get the arrows in their back, you know? When you're out front, and I can't deal with the galleries. I'd much rather show in a place like this, and it's more meaningful to me. So wonder if maybe in the future we'll do something with them. And then there's my son, Nicholas, my second born. All right, just to leave this off, there's lots of reading about NFTs and algorithmic art. There's just 3 articles I read, but I found this one and it's really cool and I want to share it with you, okay? Ruth, John, and Tom Holman wrote a nice tutorial on generative artistry. So this is 9 tutorials on generative art, but I want you to see number 7. Hypnotic squares. So here I am. This is the rediscovering yourself on the internet stuff. So I've had a lot of people write code that I've published before. I haven't paid much attention to it over years. I think that's kind of flattery, right? But, you know, it's just I can't be humble about this, but it's humbling. Right? It's cool to see people picking up on your stuff and carrying it forward. And I hope that's what my contribution is to society, okay? Is that I was there at the beginning. It was hard. It's a lot easier now. But there's a history to it that's pretty rich, okay? And a lot to be learned from the past and lots to look at. If you're interested in it, you know, dive in. There's lots of stuff out there. All right, so the other ones, I don't know. The second one, 3 things you need for generative art: randomness, repetition, structure, and recursion. Well, that's bullshit. Recursion is just something calling itself, right? I don't know. So they're experts, right? Somebody from out of town with slides, that's an expert. All right, so in conclusion, thank you all for coming out, on a balmy winter night. And I want to thank my host and the city of Toronto, the crowd here, for coming. And I'll open this up to any questions if you have any. Maybe I can clarify something or tell you about something that you might want to know about.